Hello, my name is Samuel Martin, and for my final project presentation, I will be doing it on male victimization in domestic abuse cases. A little bit about myself. I come from Milton, Wisconsin, a small town outside of Madison. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in criminal justice and in psychology, and I come to Kaiser as part of the baseball program. And I'm obviously working on my criminal justice degree to someday either stick with coaching in baseball or to pursue a career in law enforcement someday. Moving forward, here are the basic understandings of the topic and that of the research that was done. The legal definition of domestic violence, this is according to the Cornell School of Law. Domestic violence refers to violent acts committed by a family or household member against another, such as child abuse or the mistreatment of one spouse. Domestic violence can refer to physical harm inflicted on a member of a household or family by another member of the same household or family. The catch-all term domestic violence can generally apply to any partners, married or unmarried, straight or gay, living together, or simply dating. Um, what has triggered this research and previous research before is that the number of males who are victims of domestic violence, because they are typically the abusers, has risen and has gone to, upwards to 50 out of every 100,000 males are now victims of this crime, and most of those 50 men are men that are part of the LGBTQ community. The next portion of this presentation that needs to be taken is understanding what exactly domestic violence is and how the crime trends in the U.S. It is actually one of the most common crimes that occurs in the U.S. Whether you look at the as victims or if looked at as reported, it still pops up as one of the most common crimes, and it makes much sense because all people live in some domestic way or form, and people have emotions, and they they can be extreme at times, and events happen, and people can lose control. It is also, unfortunately, one of the most lethal crimes in the U.S. This does not mean that every time there is a domestic violent crime that someone dies right then and there resulting in it. It can be due to the fact that an abuser comes back and takes revenge, or it goes on and on and on and doesn't get treated, or because it goes reported and events are not taken to help the victim, the abuser ends up taking the life of the victim. Or vice versa at times, wherein a victim just has enough and snaps and takes the life of their partner. It was not officially a crime until the 1970s. Now, wife beating became a crime in the 1920s, but domestic violence, as shown in the last slide, is more than just beating one's wife. It's having physical altercations with anyone that a person finds themselves living with. Now to look at what makes this study unique and why this study became research in the first place. Domestic violence and men. Like I previously stated, 50 out of 100,000 men are victims of this crime. This has been a number that not only has risen in the last 10 years, it has been rising every year in the last 15 years. Men are becoming more and more victims of this crime, and if it goes unnoticed, it will continue to grow, and it'll become a bigger problem. So instead of taking the reactive approach and letting something go unsaid just because it's not a large number, it's important to pay attention to trends and watch trends in different crimes and see where they're going and at what rate they're going. Um, and it keeps coming up, but the homosexual, LGBTQ, these are the kind of men that are victims of these crimes and abusers. Sometimes, as long with abusers, uh, in the last 15 years, there have been more and more openly gay relationships, and because of this, there is more of a population disputes, domestic violence, and because of that, naturally, the numbers of victims are going to rise. Now, because the trends that were occurring and because of new information and societal trends, there tends to be studies and research that follows. And what this presentation is about, what this presentation focuses on, the literature that it focuses on and surrounds itself around, comes from a research and research article written by Perryman and Appleton titled "Male Victims of Domestic Violence." Right off the bat, they set the tone and the background of their paper by laying out the information on the increasing in population of the male victims, why it's occurring, um, what has happened in the last 15 years with societal views, the increase in the LGBTQ community, and they also add that there is a more proactive approach to domestic violence in the U.S. nowadays, to where there is the automatic arrest compared to the past. Officers kind of left it up into the hands of the family to take care of this business. As I mentioned, the same-sex couples are having an increase so that the male population is rising. And then they also lay out risk factors, which become truly important because it without these risk factors, there's not really a way to find a solution to them. And some of the risk factors that they include are economic status, uh, military background, race is another one, sexual orientation is one, and lastly, uh, whether they are married or just living together, or the different statuses of the people that live within the household. Next, we move on to the research that Perryman and Appleton conducted, and that actually was very instrumental to better understand and wrap our heads around um, why the population is growing, what can be done to change it, and how it kind of came to this point it is right now. Um, so they studied local police departments, or excuse me, not local police departments. They studied um, victimization reports, uh, report reports, uniform crime reports of domestic violence in local areas that were around them in the Northeast area. And they used this number, they gathered this data and went through the different cases and found all the male victims and counted them up. This is one of the case studies, and they did a very, very strong job of the population variation by looking through all these different ones and different cases and case studies, and they even expanded at some cases as well in order to look at farther away departments. They gathered information from other places in the U.S. and other domestic violent crimes. Now, just like any research or papers or anything in the scholarly world, there are some criticisms to this paper, and rightfully so. Um, One of them is the population size. Although they did reach out and go into other regions and looked into domestic crimes in other regions of the country, they really did stay local and only focused on uh, their depart their departments around them and the victims where they conducted their research. Um, the other one is they really don't lend a solution. It gives you the information you need to develop one as a scholar or as a person that is interested or has the background to think outside the box. But the paper itself does not come out and say how to solve the problem or how to slow down this current trend that's going on. And the overpopulating, um, the paper makes it seem as though that 50 out of 100,000 is more like 5,000 out of 100,000. Uh, the amount right now is less than a percent. Granted, as I've said, it is rising and it is important to keep eyes on trend when it rises, especially in crime in the criminal justice world, but it is not as severe a problem as the authors sometimes play off. Now comes a portion that the using the research done from Perryman and Appleton's article and other articles found in the reference page coming up. The authors come up with a solution to slow down the trend that has been occurring over the last 15 years. First off is victor empowerment. As both this paper and other papers suggest, the strongest correlation to domestic violence is socioeconomic status. This being, a lot of times the victim doesn't have the money to become independent, so they're relying financially on their abuser. Thus, they can't leave, they can't take their kids with them, they can't get away from the situation, and they end up staying in the cycle of abuse. If there is victim empowerment, and the the system takes a stronger approach of even just finding that person a job, counseling them in job services, it could go a long way to bringing the number down and not allowing victims to be re-victimized. A greater separation between the abuser and victim. Yes, there's the arrest, but there's nothing really done that follows up to keep them apart for a long period of time. There's the 48-hour rule in many states, but other than that, nothing. That situation doesn't always diffuse in just 48 short hours. It can take weeks or even months sometimes for a person to change. And public knowledge. When people talk about domestic abuse, they usually think as the woman as the victim and never even comprehend a male as being a possible victim. If this can be spread, if the gay community can take a hold of this and attack this, it can go a long way to slowing down the rates. Finally, the conclusion of my presentation. Rise in openly gay relationships has caused male victims to rise in domestic abuse cases. As stated before, it's just a cause and effect thing of there being more openly gay relationships in the U.S. Studies show that domestic abuse is strongly correlated to economic status. Above all any other causes, this one was found to have the strongest correlation, and part of the reason why people find themselves in the circle of domestic abuse because they are so codependent on their abuser. And finally, victim empowerment is best way to lower re-victimization in overall numbers. Instead of focusing on the abusers and what can be done to change the abusers and their ways and how they think and how they feel, it is better to empower the victim, to pick them up, to dust them off, to set them on a better life path than it is to try and fix someone that commits a crime like domestic abuse. Finally, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I hope you learned something new. I hope this piqued your interest in this topic and might make you look a little bit deeper. And I appreciate your time. Here are my references, and this completes my presentation.